Today we are talking about a powerful and emotional message from a former Iranian political prisoner who says there is something the world, and especially Donald Trump, needs to hear. This is not just one person's story. It reflects the voices of many Iranians who have lived through fear, imprisonment, and silence, and who now want their experiences to shape global decisions. The story begins with the reality of political imprisonment in Iran. For decades, people accused of opposing the government, criticizing leaders, or even peacefully demanding basic rights have faced arrest. Many are taken without clear charges, held in harsh conditions, and pressured to confess. For those who survive, prison becomes a place that permanently changes how they see power, justice, and freedom. The former prisoner at the center of this discussion describes being arrested for beliefs rather than crimes. Like many others, they say their real offense was speaking out, organizing, or refusing to stay silent. In their account, prison was not only about physical confinement, but also psychological pressure designed to break identity and hope. Days blurred together, interrogations were constant, and the future felt completely uncertain. What makes this story especially relevant now is the audience they are trying to reach. The former prisoner has directly addressed Donald Trump, not as a symbol, but as a decision-maker whose choices had real consequences for Iran and the wider region. Their message is not simply praise or condemnation, but a plea to understand the human cost behind political strategies. They explain that when international leaders talk about sanctions, pressure, or maximum pressure campaigns, ordinary people feel the effects first. While governments argue over nuclear programs and regional influence, families struggle with rising prices, shortages of medicine, and shrinking opportunities. The former prisoner stresses that authoritarian systems often survive sanctions while citizens pay the highest price. At the same time, the speaker does not let the Iranian leadership off the hook. They are clear that repression, corruption, and lack of accountability are central problems. Prison, in their view, was a direct result of a system that fears independent voices. They argue that any serious policy toward Iran must recognize that the government and the people are not the same. One of the most striking parts of their message is the rejection of simple narratives. They say the situation in Iran cannot be reduced to good versus evil slogans or quick fixes. Change, they argue, is complex and slow, and often driven from within society rather than imposed from outside. Foreign pressure can sometimes strengthen hardliners who claim they are defending the nation. The former prisoner tells Trump that strong words may sound decisive, but they can close doors for reformers and activists inside Iran. When external threats grow louder, space for internal debate shrinks. Authorities label critics as traitors or foreign agents, making activism even more dangerous. The speaker knows this personally, having faced accusations of serving outside powers. They describe how prison taught them the value of solidarity. Inside, political prisoners from different backgrounds shared stories, supported each other, and kept hope alive in small ways. These moments, they say, prove that Iranian society contains deep resilience and a desire for dignity. Any foreign policy that ignores this human dimension misses a crucial truth. Addressing Trump directly, the former prisoner asks him to listen rather than only speak. They urge him to hear from victims, families of prisoners, and civil society voices, not just officials and advisors. They argue that policies shaped only by power calculations often fail because they misunderstand the society they target. The message also challenges the idea that suffering automatically leads to uprising. The speaker explains that extreme economic pressure does not always translate into political change. Instead, it can lead to exhaustion, fear, and survival-focused thinking. People become less able to organize when they are worried about basic needs. The former prisoner reflects on how international headlines rarely capture daily life under pressure. Media attention spikes during protests or crises, then fades. But for those living there, the struggle continues quietly. This gap between global attention and local reality is something they want leaders like Trump to recognize. They also speak about dignity. Even in prison, they say, people held onto their sense of self through small acts of resistance, such as refusing to confess falsely or supporting fellow inmates. These acts may seem minor, but they represent a refusal to accept total control. The speaker believes dignity is the foundation of any lasting political change. When it comes to negotiations, the former prisoner takes a nuanced position. They do not argue that talking to authoritarian governments is morally clean, but they say isolation has costs. Dialogue, they argue, can open limited spaces for relief, prisoner exchanges, or humanitarian access. Total disengagement often leaves prisoners forgotten. The message emphasizes that human rights should not be treated as a bargaining chip. The former prisoner criticizes moments when rights issues are raised loudly, then dropped for strategic reasons. They ask Trump and other leaders to be consistent, to treat political prisoners as people, not leverage. They also address the emotional toll of imprisonment after release. Freedom does not immediately erase trauma. Former prisoners carry fear, anger, and grief, and many struggle to rebuild normal lives. By speaking out, the former prisoner says they are trying to transform pain into purpose. Another key point is the danger of romanticizing collapse. The speaker warns against the idea that making life unbearable will force a system to fall quickly. History, they argue, shows that societies can endure immense hardship without achieving freedom. Sudden collapse can also create chaos that harms the most vulnerable. The former prisoner asks Trump to consider policies that support Iranian civil society indirectly. This could include easing restrictions on communication tools, allowing humanitarian trade, and avoiding rhetoric that fuels nationalism. They argue that empowering people is more effective than punishing them. They also speak about trust. Years of broken promises, shifting policies, and aggressive language have left many Iranians skeptical of foreign intentions. Rebuilding trust, they say, requires patience and humility. Leaders must acknowledge past mistakes and listen carefully. The message is not anti-American, nor is it blindly pro-Western. It is rooted in lived experience. The former prisoner says they are not asking Trump to like the Iranian government, but to see Iranians as partners in a shared desire for stability and dignity. They recall moments in prison when news from the outside world reached them, often distorted or incomplete. International decisions felt distant yet deeply personal. A new sanction, a speech, or a military threat could change the mood overnight. This connection between distant power and intimate suffering is central to their appeal. The former prisoner also challenges the idea that strength must always be loud. They suggest that quiet diplomacy, respect, and consistency can sometimes achieve more than threats. Strength, they argue, can mean restraint and listening. They acknowledge that Trump's supporters may view pressure as necessary. To them, the speaker says accountability matters, but it should be targeted and smart. Blanket policies often miss their targets. Those with power find ways around them, while ordinary people cannot. The story then turns to hope. Despite everything, the former prisoner believes change is possible. They point to young people, women, and workers who continue to push boundaries in everyday life. These efforts may not always make headlines, but they slowly reshape society. They urge Trump to imagine how his words are translated, shared, and interpreted inside Iran. A single phrase can be used by state media to justify repression or silence critics. Leaders, they say, must understand the ripple effects of their language. The former prisoner's message is ultimately about responsibility. Power carries consequences, intended or not. They ask Trump to take responsibility not just for geopolitical outcomes, but for human ones. Decisions made in offices far away can determine whether someone is arrested, silenced, or allowed to breathe freely. They also call on viewers and the international community to pay attention beyond moments of crisis. Political prisoners often disappear from public conversation once headlines move on. Remembering them, they say, is an act of resistance against forgetting. The speaker reflects on the irony of being labeled dangerous while advocating for basic rights. In prison, they met teachers, students, journalists, and workers, all accused of threatening national security. Their shared crime was caring about their society. Addressing Trump one last time, the former prisoner asks him to consider legacy. How will history remember decisions about Iran? As moments of escalation and suffering, or as steps toward reducing harm and opening space for people to breathe? They make clear they are not naive. They understand international politics is messy and interests clash. But they insist that listening to those most affected can lead to better choices. Ignoring them guarantees repetition of mistakes. The message closes with a reminder that behind every policy debate are real lives. Prison cells are not abstract concepts. They are rooms with walls, doors, and people inside. The former prisoner wants Trump, and everyone watching, to picture that reality before speaking or acting. They say that if leaders truly want change, they must start by hearing the voices that were once silenced. Only then can policies move beyond punishment and towards something that resembles justice and humanity. In sharing this story, we are reminded that political news is not just about power struggles, but about individuals who endure the consequences. Whether or not Trump hears this message directly, its value lies in forcing a deeper conversation about how the world engages with Iran and its people. And that is why this message matters. Not because it offers easy answers, but because it demands careful listening, empathy, and responsibility from those who hold power, and from all of us who watch, discuss, and vote based on these issues.